Hey guys, how's it going? Seán here. So I've made another preset pack for the folks over at Reason Studios. This time it's based around the Beatmap device. I actually did a video on Beatmap when it came out back when Reason 11.2 was announced a couple of months ago. I kind of highlighted how it's very useful for generating kind of drum grooves and drum beats for your tracks. But for the sort of music that I like, and the sort of production that I do, I really found it quite interesting, not as a drum tool, but more as a random rhythmic generator for more interesting sounds like ambient textures and Foley and sound design explorations and stuff. I also made a demo track just highlighting a couple of the sounds. So what I thought I'd do today is just kind of dive in and show off some of the patches and show you how I created them. So let's have a look at this first sound. I called it the root and fifth ambient machine. The synth patch itself is actually very simple. I'll go over that in a second. Basically what I'm doing here in Beatmap is I have the notes assigned to F3, F4, and C4 and C5. The root and the fifth of the key of F spanning across 2 octaves. And basically what it's doing is generating interesting rhythms of those notes. So let me take off all of these effects and show you what Beatmap is actually doing just with the synth. And yeah, you might be surprised at how simple this sound actually is. So like I said, that's just generating some random interesting rhythms of those 4 notes. For the synth itself, I've got 3 oscillators. So oscillator 1 is a sine wave, and I've got LFO3 at a really, really slow rate, just kind of affecting the amount of sync on that oscillator. Oscillator 2 is a bit more of a sharper sine wave, kind of close to a triangle wave. The noise mod on this just kind of adding some cool noise texture to it. And in the unison setting, I've got 7 counts of unison, blended 100%, a bit of detune and a bit of stereo spread on that. And then the third oscillator is just a sine wave, some noise mod again, but I have it run through this formant filter. And also with this high frequency noise, it just adds more noise. So these are all run through a low pass filter. I have it set to be kind of a plucky sound with a small bit of attack just to soften the sound a little bit. You might notice that the sound is kind of moving from left to right, and that is because I've got LFO1 here set to a kind of random shape at a kind of medium rate, and I have that affecting the amp pan. So that's affecting the entire panning of the synth signal. In the synth itself, I'm using the phaser just at a really slow rate. EQ just to remove some hunky mid-range frequencies. Where this sound gets really interesting though is with all of these effects added on. I'm using the echo, as you might be able to see, I called it the infinite echo device. I have it set to a ping pong and the feedback is set to 99%. The 99% is the amount of feedback right before the synth goes into what's called self-oscillation, where the repeats start feeding back in again and starts distorting. And it actually sounds really, really cool, but that's not what we're after in this. The 99% feedback just creates a near infinite amount of repeats. With the dry wet set to 44%, a small bit of modulation, and the filter, we've got this. You might be able to hear the drive and that mid-range kind of saturation kick in on some of the repeats. I've got the drive set to 50% on the distortion mode, and it just creates this really nice tape echo mid-range kind of thing. So that is with the infinite echo. You can still hear the repeats fading away in the background. Next up, we've got this reverse reverb, and that takes everything we've just had and creates this. So the point of this reverb is not just to create a reverse effect, but basically it takes the kind of randomness of the Beatmap patch and that infinite echo. It takes that texture and creates more of a rhythmic and more predictable result. Next up, we've got the tape algorithm in the Audiomatic Retro Transformer. I use this in nearly every sound that I create. can really hear it on some of those higher notes. It just adds a bit of mid-range crunch, which is really nice. Next up, I've got the vocoder, but I'm using it as an EQ. So I've touched on this in a few of my other videos as well. Using the EQ mode, setting it to 4 or 8 bands, and this shift control is kind of like a formant shifter. Basically, it just kind of adds this digital top end to the high frequencies. Really subtle, but it just adds that nice digital edge. Then I've got this EQ, so I'm high passing up to 330 Hertz, which gets rid of pretty much all of the bottom end. And I'm low passing to 935 Hertz, which gets rid of all the top end. Up in the macro controls here, I've got a control for the high pass, so you can control just how much of the low end you want to leave in the signal, which is kind of nice. Now, next up, I've got this compressor, and it sounds like it isn't doing much. It's just controlling some of those notes that are a bit higher in volume that kind of poke out a little bit. Now, next up, I've got even more reverb. I've got the decay set to 114, so it's almost infinite, kind of what we were doing with the echo earlier. The dry wet mix to 91, so it's more wet signal than dry signal. This is what it sounds like. And if that wasn't enough ambience, I've got one last reverb set to the convolution mode. I'm not quite sure exactly what type of reverb this is. This just adds that last overall character reverb. So let's move on to the next sound. I've called this Foley keys combo. So my thought process when making this patch was to create something playable. Beatmap by default is more of a click, run, and let it do its thing kind of a device. So basically I wanted to make a sound that was playable on top of anything that Beatmap was creating. Before we go into what Beatmap is doing, this patch has a lovely keyboard sound, which is using Thor. Really, really simple sound. Running it through the tape in the Audiomatic as usual. But the real interesting thing here is what Beatmap is doing with this Kong. Let me turn down the keys level up here and let's take a listen to what is going on. So yeah, it's kind of a weird texture. What I did here is I used some Foley sounds, which for those of you who don't know is like basically any sound. I recorded my keys, I recorded me hitting a table, anything just to create some weird sounds. I've got me scrunching something up. I've lowered the pitch of it so it sounds a bit lower. I'm using the compressor and the filter in Kong here as well just to shape it a bit. This kind of sounds like thunder now, even though it was like me probably scrunching up a packet of potatoes or something. Next sound. This is me zipping my guitar case. Added some noise. And I filtered it again. Kind of gives it an underwater vibe. And basically I just repeated that with some random Foley noises and created a kind of drum kit of weirdness. For Beatmap, it's triggering the drum pads of this drum kit. So here's what that sounds like. Yeah, that kind of sounds a little bit strange, but with the keyboard and the playable element in it, you can create a keyboard sound that sounds a bit more unique and a bit different. So I came up with this part, and here is what the whole sound sounds like. Just to show you how that kind of sits with the track, let me play the root and fifth ambient machine and the Foley keys together and show you how it just creates this lovely texture. So just using 2 sounds from this pack created the whole atmosphere and the inspiration for this little song that I put together. The last sound we'll take a look at is this space bloops preset. So I've got Beatmap set up to trigger all of these notes, all diatonic to the key of C. They are triggering this sine wave in this Thor patch, which is a really, really simple sound. Again, using the vocoder, just getting that digital crunch kind of thing going on. What's cool about this, you can really hear it on sine waves. It sounds like it messes up the transients a little bit in a good way. It kind of has that squelchy sound, for lack of a better word. Again, I'm using Polar for some pitch shifting effects. The first shifter pitching everything up an octave and the second shifter down an octave. I've got the feedback turned up a little bit on both of these shifters, which just kind of creates some shimmery effects. And then lastly, I'm using the reverse reverb again, and sounds like this. Now, I won't cover every sound I created, but I hope I kind of showcase just how creative you can get with these devices and all the various effects in the Reason rack. It's really, really cool. From here, I just kind of built up the track using some more sounds, and with all of those together, I ended up with this really cool sound. I added a bass line. Added some drums. And came up with this. Alright, so that was a quick look at some of the patches I created for the Beatmap Explorations pack. Hope you enjoyed the video, hope you learned something. You can check out the presets at the Reason Studios website in the link in the description below. Be sure to hit the like button if you enjoyed this video and let me know what you think down in the comments. And if you want to see some more content from me, please consider subscribing as well. And be sure to hit the little bell icon so that you can be notified of when I put out new videos. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Cheers.